happen. We want it to happen before, not.
If Miss Axney isn't here, this is the introduction for Mr. Ewalt, but I'm going to try to figure out where Miss Axney is.
Okay, well, the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture will now come to order. And I want to thank the members here, our chair and our ranking member as well, for participating in this important subcommittee to talk about the impacts that the trade has had from a stakeholder perspective throughout the breadth and width of American agriculture. And we have 5 good witnesses that I think reflect that perspective, and we look forward to their testimony. I've got an opening statement, as does the ranking member, and then we, as custom, will defer to the chair and to the ranking member of the full committee. For the purposes of the challenge that we have this morning with multiple committees meeting at the same time, we have witnesses here that come from various districts that in which you live in the constituency of members of this committee, and they would like to introduce you. Given that fact that we have members trying to fulfill other obligations, I'm going to, after the opening statements, allow the members of this committee to introduce those witnesses from their districts, and then we will begin with the witnesses in the order that they are listed here. So with that understanding, good morning. Good morning. It is a good morning. Got a little bit of rain. I wish we had more of it in California, but it is a good morning. We welcome today our witnesses and to hear their perspective on from the people who actually grow and raise and sell America's agricultural products. This incredible cornucopia of food that nobody does it better than the American farmer, rancher, dairyman, and woman who every day toil in the fields to produce the finest quality and nutritious crops at the highest production levels anywhere in the world. As one of my favorite songwriters, Paul McCartney once said, "Nobody does it better. Nobody does it better than the American farmer." Trade is, I believe, in part what drives the demand and sustains markets for so much of what we produce in California as well as throughout the country. In my home state, which is the largest agricultural producer in the nation, we raise more than 400 commodities. It's amazing to think about that, over 400 commodities, and it represents 13% of the nation's total agricultural value at around $50 billion annually at the farm gate. That was in 2018. But I feel personally that, unfortunately, that I think the President's trade war has adversely impacted farmers not only in California but nationwide. He was quoted that we ought to buy bigger tractors and prepare yourself for a boom time to come. But I think the reality is over the last 18 months, the trade aid package, which was important and we all supported here on a bipartisan level, was an attempt to make up for the deficits that I think a better trade strategy would have avoided. We've provided billions of dollars in market facilitation program payments, but they are clear proof that the policies of the last several years have moved us further away from free and open markets in which American agriculture thrives, to say nothing about the inequities that I think existed in the program that was structured, especially in a place like California, where we have a host of specialty crops that did not benefit from the market facilitation program, unfortunately. Now, nobody here is going to dispute that farmers need to be compensated for the pain they've gone through. Clearly, it's part of the safety net that reflects itself in the Farm Bill. But as Chairman Peterson said last week, it's worth repeating, a farm economy propped up by payments from the government is not a healthy farm economy. And as Secretary Perdue said last week, and I quote him, "We know farmers want trade and not aid." And I think both statements are true. So how do we get to that point? I was very proud, and again, there was a strong bipartisan support that came from this committee and elsewhere that passed the U.S.-Mexico-Canadian trade agreement. And I commend the President and Secretary Ambassador Lighthouser with the bipartisan effort that included the Speaker and included many members of this committee all of last year to continue to work hard to push that bipartisan effort. And we hope that good things are going to come from that in terms of improved trade that will benefit business and the partnership that exists between Mexico and Canada. Actually combine the two countries together, and they account for more trade than the next 8 nations that we trade with. Secretary Lighthouser's efforts with Japan on Phase 1, I think, also is a good start. And we need to, I think, address other deficiencies in the dairy and rice issues that I think we all care about so that we can prevent full access on par with what we would have received, I think, if the Trans-Pacific Partnership had been implemented. And, of course, those 13 nations have moved on without us. So we must continue to be vigilant and work hard in a bipartisan effort in these areas. I do have a level of skepticism that the initial deal with China is going to prove all the results that have been stated. I do hope it does move markets forward, and we will have to wait and see what actually gets purchased here. But clearly we know that the coronavirus outbreak is going to impact the market demand in China. We have agricultural commodities that have been shipped to China in the last month that are being held at port because of the quarantines, and these involve poultry products and others in which I have been in contact with industries from California. We also hope that the Chinese will focus on the progress that was made on the technical barriers that Ambassador Lighthouser negotiated in trade with China. That's part of the initial agreement. And I'm keeping an eye on that implementation to see what sort of opening we agreed to that will give, in particular for California, Chinese purchase in citrus. We're the largest citrus producer in the nation, and I'm being a little parochial here, but those markets are important to citrus production throughout the country. Looking ahead, I think we need to also turn our focus on the United Kingdom as a result of Brexit, as well as the European Union. I'm especially concerned on how the U.S. poultry exports into those markets. And I don't think we should look away from what we're doing that's been proven successful. Now, before I talk about that for a moment, we had the Trade Ambassador Phil Hogan here last month, who met with members of the committee on a bipartisan basis. I think I've worked with the Trade Minister, Phil Hogan, over the years when he was the Agricultural Minister. He clearly understands for us to have success with the European Union that agriculture has to be on the table. And I think we need to continue to bring that front and center. I know Ambassador Lighthouser feels that way. I believe the President feels that way. But let's look at some of the programs that have been successful in promoting agricultural trade. These promotion programs under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee, like Market Access Program, Foreign Market Development Program, Technical Assistance for Specialty Crops, have decades-long track record of establishing a foothold for American farmers, ranchers, and dairymen on foreign markets. And we need to, I think, enhance that effort. But let me just bottom line and close on this note. I am optimistic about the future. I guess I'm optimistic about the future because I am a third-generation farmer. And to be a farmer, let me tell you folks, and I know we all represent farmers and ranchers, you better be an optimist. Because clearly, I think 5% of American population represents American agriculture. It's a credible tribute to their success that less than 5% of the American population can produce all of this cornucopia plenty. And they are hard workers, we know that. And they are optimistic, as well as the people who work on those farms. So we need to continue to provide the support this administration needs to, I think, do everything they can to be partners as we allow them to sell their products for a fair and level playing field. I know our witnesses have some ideas on how we can do a better job. We're looking forward to having you tell us how we can do a better job. At the close of my remarks, in consultation with the ranking member, Pursuant to Rule 11E, excuse me, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware and other members of the full committee that obviously you may join us today, and I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. We're especially fortunate to have you here representing production agriculture, knowing that spring in particular is a very, very busy time of year for you. I look forward to your comments about how trade has impacted your operations and the opportunities you each see ahead in the future. We all know American farmers and ranchers produce the highest quality crops, livestock, poultry, and dairy products in the world. That value proposition is well known by our customers around the globe who purchase more than 20% of U.S. agriculture production. For some commodities, though, like soybeans and cotton, it's 50 and 75% of U.S. production is exported. But the importance of trade goes far beyond just the value of what flows through our ports and crosses our borders. The ability of U.S. agriculture to participate in a worldwide marketplace is essential to our markets at home and the ability to make a profit. You can't do anything if you can't make a profit. And so many people have not been able to achieve that for reasons well beyond their control. We've seen just how true this is with recent disruptions and access to certain international markets. But I think it's very instructive to remember China, Turkey, India, the EU, and others have used high tariffs, currency manipulation, and burdensome non-tariff trade barriers harming rural America for years. The House Agriculture Committee has highlighted these concerns for a very long period of time, and we are finally seeing a little bit of progress. This administration has secured extensive commitments with 3 major trade deals representing 50% of our agriculture exports. USMCA secures and modernizes our trade relationship with our closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada. The U.S.-Japan trade agreement helps align our market access for U.S. farm products with the access Japan has granted to our competitors. And the China Phase 1 agreement is a good first step to getting China to nearly double their purchases of U.S. farm products. We'll see if they live up to it. Additionally, all 3 of these agreements take huge steps to modernize scientific standards and remove non-tariff barriers. These, as well as the rest of our trade agreements, must be properly enforced to create the conditions necessary to improve the farm economy. Our trading partners must live up to their agreements. I know that we all of us here in this chamber, as well as our friends in the Senate, and particularly our friends at USDA and USDR, will be watching very closely. Again, thank you for our witnesses for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the ranking member for his statement, and as customary, we will give an opportunity for the chair if he wishes to make any comments, and he passes. And we'll certainly recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Conway from Texas, for any comments he may like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses being here today to visit with us about farm-level impacts of trade. Right now, things are pretty tough back home for our farmers and ranchers because competing in an unfair and distorted markets is really tough, and our trading partners do really well at sometimes distorting those markets. I'm also pleased the administration has taken strong action to establish what it means to trade with the United States. We're requiring our trading partners to abide by their existing commitments, and we're negotiating new trade agreements to increase market access and remove non-trade barriers. There's still a lot of work to be done. Mr. Chairman, I know that Ambassador Lighthouser and Greg Dowd will be most appreciative of the bipartisan suggestions that you alluded to in your comments to improve our trade and trading partner reference work, and look forward to you working with them in that regard. And also look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you all for being here. Now yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement, and now, as I indicated on the outset, we're going to allow members here to introduce their witnesses in the order that it's been presented to me, and then we will then begin with the witnesses' opening statements, because again, we have multiple committees meeting simultaneously, and members have to try to sometimes be in 2 places at one time, and that makes it difficult. So I'd like to recognize Congresswoman Axne to introduce her witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor and privilege to welcome fellow Iowan Rob Ewalt to the House Agriculture Committee. Rob is the owner and operator of Rafter E Ranch in Scott County, Iowa. He serves as secretary of the Iowa Soybean Association and also raises hogs and cattle. Rob is a longtime advocate for his profession and is a strong promoter of Iowa and U.S. soybeans through participation in trade delegations and speaking at forums and producer workshops. He and his wonderful wife have also been recognized for their commitment to conservation and agricultural advocacy. And Rob, I'm so grateful to have you here today, and thank you so much for being here to share your story.
We thank the Congresswoman from Iowa for that very kind and accurate introduction, and we look forward to Mr. Ewalt's testimony. We also have Congresswoman Hayes, who would like to introduce her witness this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the privilege of introducing Mr. Jacquer from Connecticut's 5th Congressional District. Mr. Jacquer, or Cricket, as he's known at home, is the owner of Laurelbrook Farm, a multi-generation cow dairy in East Canaan, Connecticut. In addition to their 1,500 cow operation, Laurelbrook Farm also runs a landscaping compost operation, not only adding to the value of their farm, but exemplifying the future of sustainable dairy farming. Mr. Jacquer is the chairman of the Board of Agrimark and is a member of the Board of Directors and Executive Committee for the National Milk Producers Federation. He embodies the power of Connecticut's dairy industry. It might be smaller than some other states, but our voice cannot be discounted. I speak for the committee when I say I am honored to have you here today and look forward to your testimony.
We thank the Congresswoman from Connecticut for her strong advocacy on behalf of American agriculture, and it's always good to have the dairy industry represented, and we look forward to your testimony as well, James. Next, we have my colleague and neighbor, Congressman T.J. Cox, who wishes to introduce a witness from the breadth and width of the heart of the San Joaquin Valley. Congressman Cox.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And today I'm proud to introduce a constituent of the 21st Congressional District, Mr. Brian Keevy, a proud graduate from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, one of the nation's top ag schools. I believe Mr. Keevy, at one time or another, was probably a constituent of yours, Mr. Chairman, in your long, distinguished career representing the San Joaquin Valley. But Mr. Keevy is Vice President of International Sales and Marketing at Kingsburg Orchards in Kingsburg, California. And Kingsburg Orchards is a 5th-generation family-owned farm that grows over 10,000 acres of fresh fruit, including peaches, plums, and nectarines. They are one of the largest exporters of stone fruit in the United States, supplying the vast majority of things like white peaches to vital export markets such as Taiwan. If you want to know what's going on in our international markets, particularly in the East, the people at the tip of the spear are Kingsburg Orchards and Mr. Keevy. So thank you so much for being here, Mr. Keevy, and we very much are looking forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Cox, for that very good introduction of Mr. Keevy. It reminds me of a subcommittee hearing I was engaged in about 10 years ago when we had a similar witness, a neighbor of yours, Mr. Keevy, that was going on and on about stone fruit this and that, and some of my colleagues from the Midwest were looking at me kind of strange, and I had to explain to them that we use the definition of stone fruit in California for any fruit that has a pit in it. We don't actually grow stones in California. I know that many of you think we have a peculiar way of doing a lot of things in California, but stone fruit is a staple commodity that we're very proud of. Mr. Rouser, you have a witness here as well, and we're anxious to hear about your introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and incidentally, I've always had a curious question about California. I hear almond and I hear almond. What's the difference?
Well, you want to hear a little farm joke? We call them almonds when they're all in the tree, and then in August and September, we have a low-profile tractor that goes down the row with a 6-foot pneumatic tongue that has a clamp at the bottom, and for 20 seconds, we grab the bottom of the tree, and we shake the L out of them, and when they fall to the ground, they become almonds. Right, Doug? Almonds on the tree, on the ground, almonds.
Well, I always thought that Jeff Denham was talking funny, so you've helped to explain that to me, sir.
Well, that could be.
No, it's a great pleasure to introduce Lorinda Overman, who is a good friend and constituent of mine in my district. She is part of a multi-generational farming operation, and they have 3 hog farms, produce 4,000 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat. They've got 200 head of cattle. She is a board member of the Wayne County Farm Bureau, a past board member of the North Carolina Farm Bureau. She's a very distinguished member of the American Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee, and also serves as vice president of the North Carolina Pork Council. Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, she is a very, very busy lady, and they are a fine farming operation to boot. It's my honor to introduce her today to the committee. I yield back.
Mr. Rouser, we're extremely pleased to have your witness here with us this morning. And women in agriculture, we know historically have always played a terrific and incredible role. And we see that role continuing to expand as it should. And so we're very pleased. Our witnesses here really, I'm excited, reflect the breadth and the width of American agriculture. And we're looking forward to your testimony. And the last witness will be introduced by, again, that breadth and width of American agriculture, the state of Texas, where the eyes of Texas are always upon you. Congressman Vela.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to introduce Matt Huey. Matt Huey is the owner of Huey Farms in Beeville, Texas, where he farms cotton, sorghum, wheat, and raises cattle with his family. He received his undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University in agricultural leadership and moved back to South Texas, where he has farmed ever since. In addition to his work as a farmer, Matt is also active in the Southwest Council of Agribusiness, the South Texas Cotton and Grain Association, the National Cotton Council, the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers, Texas sorghum producers, and Texas corn producers. He is accompanied today by his wife, Shambrin, and his 9-year-old son, Zach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Congressman Vela, and we're very pleased that your witness is here. Obviously, he's been very busy, and we're glad that we welcome your family for having an opportunity to watch you testify. For those of you who have not testified before, let me just repeat the process. You have 5 minutes, and the light in front of you, when that turns yellow, that means you have 1 minute left. And when it turns red, the chair will be somewhat tolerant of you closing your statement, but if you continue to go on, the chair will be less tolerant. So you have 5 minutes to testify. We will follow in the order that you were introduced. Mr. Ewalt, you will begin, and then at the conclusion of the 5 witnesses, members of the subcommittee will then each have 5 minutes to ask questions or make comments to all of the witnesses before us. And the ranking member and I will determine, based upon interest and what kind of quorum we have here, as to whether or not we will entertain a second round. We'll play that by ear. So with that said, let's begin. Mr. Ewalt, would you begin your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Rouser, members of the subcommittee. My name is Rob Ewald. I farm near Davenport, Iowa. I represent the soybean farmers of Iowa as a district director in my state. Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts on agriculture today. I know I'm limited time, so I will do this like a fat man through a barbed wire fence. I will go as fast as I can and hit every point along the way.
That sounds good.
So I grew up on a family farm. My wife, I have 2 children, 2 boys that are 11, 13, both just live and die agriculture at this time, like every early teenage boy does on the farm. We raise corn, soybeans, some alfalfa hay. We have cattle and hog operation. You know, tough times right now. As a farmer, you accept some unknowns, and it's just the way of life. But weather, cost of inputs, the Mississippi River levels, which affected us greatly last year, and volatile market prices are just a few of the variables that we deal with. And trade is the most important. Traditionally, our soybeans are a $25 billion export for the country. More than 60% of the soybeans are exported. However, currently that's not the case. 2018, and I can still remember when the tariffs were put in place, I woke up at about 3 in the morning for some reason. I grabbed the phone like a lot of us do anymore and looked to see what's happened in the news, and sure enough, tariffs have been put on soybeans and pork, and so I quick flipped over to the overnight trade and watched the soybean price drop. You know, we saw it drop to $2 below world prices. I already had the crop planted, and like most of the farmers, we thought it was going to be short-lived. We thought that they really needed our soybeans, and we were going to come out of this pretty quick. That did not happen. Fast forward to today, we have restructured. I rent all of our ground. I do not own any land. So what equity I have is just in equipment, which depreciates fast. When you don't make money and you have to pay back an operating note, it's very difficult. We went backwards about $100,000 in 18, 19. Due to the trade and due to some weather issues, we went backwards again. I sit before you still waiting to see if I'm going to get operating money for 2020. So to say that stress is very high in my house, between my wife, myself, it is. You know, I'm not going to give up. We're going to do what we can. I've taken up a job using some of our equipment, so I drive truck at night now. If I'm going to be awake worrying about how I pay for my bills, I might as well be awake doing something to pay my bills. So I've taken a truck, one of our trucks, and drive at night to whether it be St. Louis or St. Paul or just regionally, and it is offsetting and it's keeping my lender happy. My lender's been great to work with. He's doing everything he can possibly do. Like I said, we're trying to figure out how to make this work. But it's one thing for sure that I can say that if we did not have the MFP payments in 18 and in 19, that I would not be sitting before you calling myself a farmer. It's just the way it goes. My wife and I have strong faith. We'll get through it. I think my parents are proud of us for trying to chug through this, you know. So that being said, the yellow light's on. I think there's some great opportunities out there that you all need to be champions for us to go out. We need to, as a soybean association, we've been doing our own trade mission trips. We're trying to look at new markets, whether they be in Pakistan, Bangladesh. We're trying to develop things in Northern Africa, but we need support, and we need to move this crop. We're great at what we do. We've all talked about that today already, that we are the best in our field. Sorry for the bad pun, but we are. The American farmer and rancher is incredible what they can do, and we just need to move this product out. And with that, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ewalt, and the passion and the heartfelt testimony that you just provided each and every one of us is, I think, a good and accurate reflection of the pain and the suffering, the difficulty that American farmers and ranchers, dairymen have had throughout the country in recent years for a combination of reasons, from natural weather conditions to a host of other factors that involve this trade war and have put American agriculture in a difficult place. The safety net, as you noted, has kept folks alive, but we got to do better. And I think you inspire all of us as strong advocates on behalf of American agriculture to, in fact, figure out ways to do better. And we thank you for your testimony. Hang in there. Our next witness is Mr. Jacquier, from Connecticut.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rouser.
As a third-generation dairy son, I have full empathy with you.
And members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today and provide a dairy stakeholder perspective on agriculture trade. My grandparents started Laurelbrook Farm in 1948 with just 18 cows and nothing to their name. 4 generations later, the farm has grown, the families have grown, and we are the major economic backbone to many families, employees, in our community. Our dairy farm is located in East Canaan, Connecticut, which is 2 hours from Boston, 2 hours from New York City. Every day, I work side by side with my wife, Jennifer, son, Colby, my dad, brother, and 2 nephews who are also owners. The opportunities for the next generation would not have been possible without the market opportunities created by trade agreements that supports dairy exports over the last 25 years. Just last year, America's dairy industry exported more than $6 billion in dairy products ranging from cheese to ice cream to milk powders. The farm families in our co-op are very proud to produce high-quality milk that makes world-winning dairy products that are trusted by customers around the world. If dairy farmers and their processors do not have new and continued opportunities overseas, our livelihoods are at risk. Trade disputes, uncertainty in the global marketplace, and anti-trade rhetoric has contributed to a decade-long drought in new free trade agreements. This is the opposite to what our competitors like the EU, New Zealand, and others have been doing as they've been diligently negotiating and passing trade agreements. This has hit America's dairy industry hard, and we need your help. Congress and the administration must work together to expand equitable trade relationships with important markets reliant on dairy and other agricultural imports, creating greater market access for milk we produce. The harm to some sectors from trade is often discussed, while too little attention is paid to American agriculture that suffers from not enough export opportunities. Dairy is a prime example. The U.S. Department of Ag shows that U.S. lost more than 6,000 dairy farms over the last 2 years. That's over 8 per day, representing a 15% decline. My written testimony lays out specifics on the dairy industry's top priorities. And as you will see, there are several important areas on which we would ask that Congress and the administration work together, including pursuing free trade agreements that allow our industry to grow exports, particularly to the critically important dairy importing market in Asia. Focus our limited negotiating resources on discussions with trading partners that are likely to yield meaningful benefits. Give careful and proactive attention to the implementation and enforcement of negotiated trade agreements, particularly USMCA. We want to be certain that Canada and Mexico comply with their commitments. Remove all retaliatory tariffs on dairy in China so that the U.S. dairy industry can fully benefit from a Phase 1 agreement. Negotiating a comprehensive agreement with Japan that further expands dairy access in this valuable market. Break down unscientific, burdensome barriers to trade, including geographical indicators. I want to expand on my last point. We can lower tariffs and negotiate trade agreements, but if one non-tariff barrier affecting the food industry takes away market access, then we have nothing. The misuse of geographical indicators has become a pervasive problem in virtually every significant U.S. export market. It is a protectionist and anti-trade policy, and it must be firmly rejected by Congress and by U.S. trade officials at every turn. The dairy industry has no problem with GIs that have a first and last name, but each individual name should remain free for use by all competitors. GIs were meant to protect unique regional terms such as Parmigiano, Reggiano. However, the EU instead misusing these GI protections to limit exports from the U.S. of products that use generic terms such as Parmesan, Feta, Asiago, as well as wine terms and others. These are common names that millions of consumers recognize of their favorite foods. We need a laser-focused global trade policy strategy that will effectively combat the EU's efforts. USMCA set a strong precedent with its provisions on GIs, including a list safeguarding the use of common cheese names. The dairy industry wants Congress and administration to make it a policy objective to expand upon the successful framework of trade negotiations. I hope this committee will take an active role in examining and addressing these issues in the future proceedings. Your attentions to these trade issues will benefit the farmers, the processors, and rural communities.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Jacquier. You tested the patience of the chair, but your points on geographical indicators are well taken, and I think has strong support among members of the subcommittee here, and we believe it has to be addressed. Our next witness is Ms. Overman, I believe. Or hold it, I'm sorry, I skipped Mr. Keevy. Don't want to do that. Mr. Keevy from Kingsburg, home of the Watermelon Festival.
Good morning, Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Mr. David Rouser, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the importance of certainty in export markets and the stability that trade mitigation programs bring to the stone fruit industry. My name is Brian Keevy, and I've been the Vice President, International Marketing for Kingsburg Orchard for the past 12 years. Kingsburg Orchard is a fifth-generation, family-owned farm that grows over 10,000 acres of fresh fruit, which includes peaches, plums, and nectarines, collectively known as stone fruit. We are located in the heart of California in the San Joaquin Valley. The stone fruit industry is valued at approximately $800 million per year. Annually, Kingsburg Orchard exports on the average of over 10% of our 10 to 11 million boxes to over 25 countries. Our season begins in April and runs through December. We employ 200 full-time workers and around 6,000 seasonal workers and contract crews. The stone fruit industry needs certainty in our export markets. Reducing and eliminating trade barriers to expand market access is essential to the health and future of this industry. Exports typically account for 20 to 40% of total crop value. This revenue has become more important to us over the last 10 years as the industry has contracted. Due to labor-intensive nature of stone fruit farming, costs have increased significantly over the same period. Thus, securing premium export markets which have a strong profit potential is critical for the stone fruit industry's success. Chinese consumers prefer premium fruit such as Kingsburg Orchard's high-quality plums. So China has been an important market for us since 2014. Currently, plums are the only stone fruit that have been granted market access to China, but they've been subjected to several rounds of retaliatory tariffs, which resulted in significant reduction in shipments. Phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade deal was a positive step forward for the stone fruit industry. China committed to increasing purchases of U.S. agricultural products by $32 billion over the 2 years and agreed to grant market access for California nectarines. Achieving market access for nectarines presents a highly lucrative opportunity for Kingsburg Orchards, as many Chinese consumers have seen our nectarines in Hong Kong or in Taiwan already. Our importers are confident that nectarines will be highly regarded once we begin shipping them. As a result of Phase 1, China also announced that it would offer importers an opportunity to apply for exclusion from the Section 301 tariffs, which would provide some price relief and facilitate its commitment to purchase more U.S. goods. As a result, we do expect an increase in shipments for 2020 season. We would anticipate further reduction of tariffs in Phase 2 deal would result in even a larger increase in exports. Establishing markets requires significant investment and effort on part of the stone fruit industry members. Forming and maintaining relationships with importers and retailers, as well as developing consumer demand in various regions of the Chinese market is no small achievement. During the last 2 shipping seasons, importers have replaced California plums with Spanish plums or fruit from other export markets. Consumers have become accustomed to these competing products. The stone fruit industry estimates that it will take 3 to 4 years to reestablish themselves once the tariffs revert to 2017 levels. Trade mitigation programs stabilize the market for our industry members while export barriers are being addressed. We understand that it takes some time to level the playing field. When a market as important as China closes, we must find alternatives to remain competitive in the interim. The trade mitigation purchases helped relieve pressure brought on by the increased tariffs, and it is our hope that these programs will continue as long as the additional tariffs remain in place. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments on the behalf of California stone fruit industry and Kingsburg Orchards.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony and appreciate his perspective on the challenges dealing with China, and we'll look forward to going back on that with regards to the questioning. Now, we are appropriate to our next witness, Ms. Overman. Will you please proceed with your testimony?
Thank you, Chairman Costa. I appreciate your comments about women in ag, too. I think we are a force to be reckoned with. And thank you, Mr. Rouser.
Absolutely.
For this opportunity to be here. Good morning. I'm Lorinda Overman. My husband, Harold, and I are owners of Overman Farms in Wayne County, North Carolina. That's also the home of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. Their planes fly over our farm daily. We are a multi-generational farm which directly supports our 4 families, 14 employee families, and we have a broad economic impact in our community. My husband is a 6th-generation farmer. He and I have farmed hogs and row crops for more than 38 years, and we've just welcomed the return of 2 of our 3 children back to our operation along with their families. Our farm is diversified with 4,000 acres of corn, soybeans, wheat, and 3 hog farms. On our hog farm side, we have a nursery to finish farm that has 7,500 head. We have a sow farm that has 2,000 sows that weans 900 pigs a week. And we have a wean to finish farm that holds 14,000 head. Our sons are also running over 200 brood cows on about 400 acres of hay. Let me set the stage for today's testimony. North Carolina farms have endured back-to-back hurricanes and unprecedented flooding. Our farm was personally severely impacted by several major storms and the subsequent flooding. Even with our risk management tools, along with the state and the federal disaster payments, the financial and emotional impacts have been extremely difficult to manage. In order to manage the loss of income and stay current with our operating and long-term loans, my husband and I have had to sell our timber to cover financial obligations. In addition, we've had to take out loans against our life insurance policies in order to help with operating capital. We have found that commercial banks are now afraid of farmers, and it is increasingly difficult to find partners willing to finance farming operations. The farm credit system has been vital to farmers in our area. While the timing of the recent trade negotiations could have been better for North Carolina farmers, we strongly support the administration's efforts to make these agreements work better for America's farmers. Foreign trade has become the lifeblood of much of North Carolina's farm production. North Carolina's total 2019 ag exports were valued at $2.7 billion, and our total farm gate income in 2018 was $11.1 billion. Exports account for almost 1/4 of our state's farm gate income. So fair agreements will determine the future of our existence. We're grateful for the recent progress that's been made with China, and we encourage the administration to stay the course in ensuring that China lives up to its obligations. Additionally, we are grateful for the passage of the U.S., Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, which will provide certainty for our industry moving forward. The hog farm side of our farm is somewhat insulated from low market demand because our integrator has processing capacity, but area hog farmers around us with smaller integrators have unfortunately lost their contracts to grow hogs, which means they're growing hogs with no certainty of being able to sell those hogs because of the pressures on those smaller integrators. The row crop side of our operation is hurting from the years of low prices. In 2019 and again in 2020, we were not able to balance our projected budgets because of the market prices, even when we projected budget bumper crop yields. And bumper crop yields are near impossible in our area to attain. If the USDA had not issued the market facilitation programs, we would have ended 2019 in the red. The bottom line is this: farmers need every USDA and U.S. Department of Labor program that Congress has authorized to be well-funded, well-staffed, and operating at peak efficiency. We need a guest worker program that works for all of agriculture, seasonal and year-round. We need this body to closely monitor trade agreements with participating nations to see that their commitments to purchase are honored. Finally, and importantly, we need to open the new markets in Great Britain and the European nation and anywhere else that there are hungry people that are needing to eat the safest, freshest, and most affordable food that is produced anywhere in the world. Thank you very much for your attention and allowing me to be here. It's been an honor.
Well, Ms. Overman, thank you very much for your testimony. You covered, I think, some of the most important parts of American agriculture, from trade to agricultural workforce and, of course, the safety net that exists in our Farm Bill. We look forward to our next witness, who will close up the round of witnesses, and then we'll begin to the questioning. And that's Mr. Huey. Will you please proceed with your testimony, please, Mr. Huey?
Thank you, Chairman Costa, Ranking Member Rouser, Mr. Conaway. Thank you all for allowing me to be here today to testify. My name's Matt Huey. I'm a farmer and rancher from Beeville, Texas, in Chairman Vela's district. For 20 years, my wife Sharon and I have farmed and ranched in the coastal bend, raising cotton, grain sorghum, corn, cattle, and wheat, along with one daughter and two boys. In production agriculture, unknowns, faith, and significant challenges are part of everyday life. But the reality of a 7th straight year of recession, coupled with a string of natural disasters and significant trade disruptions, have brought a new level of stress to every part of life. And cotton and sorghum farmers have been at the eye of the storm. China was the largest market for cotton prior to the trade dispute. Growers had an opportunity to price cotton in the 85 to 95 cent per pound range. Prices are now, today, in the 60-cent range, and on a 2-bale cotton crop, that's a $300 per acre decrease. U.S. market share of China's imports is down by more than half, replaced largely by Brazil. Estimates of global cotton demand are off by 15 million bales for 2018 and 19, caused in large part by China's subsidies of synthetic fiber in place of natural fiber. Moreover, USDA report showed 73,000 bales of new sales to China, but 33,000 bales of cancellations. You might ask what's happening. China is placing new orders at lower prices while canceling the orders for higher prices. It's brutal. Sorghum is a similar story. Great demand and price prior to China's initiation of a bogus anti-dumping case that froze trade more than 2 years ago. A billion-dollar market that simply vanished. Sorghum has started to move again after Phase 1 passage, but at much lower prices. China's 2-year absence in the market has left massive piles of grain in Kansas, which will hang over the market like a wet blanket for some time to come. I raise cattle as well, and of course the big story out of China before the coronavirus was the African swine flu. While this should have created great markets for protein, our currencies, most notably our strong dollar compared to our competitors, have kept us from realizing any significant gains into China yet. Over the course of the last 30 years, we in agriculture have been calling for a level playing field on which to compete. We've argued it should not be just the United States that lives up to all of its trade commitments, but every country should live up to its end of the bargain. After all, that's what trade agreements are supposed to be about, enforceable, rules-based system that every country honors. This is not what we've experienced. Enforcement has been lax and usually a one-way street, with the U.S. expected to comply while other nations get a pass. So here's the bottom line for me. While the trade disputes have shaken an already depressed agriculture economy, in my view, it will be worthwhile, if we can live through it, see the new USMCA Phase 1 and other agreements deliver on their promises and be effectively enforced. On other trade fronts, Korea, Japan, the UK, the EU, and India, we're encouraged and see potential for great markets, but only time will tell. Most farmers I know are optimistic about the Phase 1 agreement, but I respectfully submit that absent a very significant turnaround in the next couple of months, an MFP3 will be absolutely essential if farmers are to hang on. The price we receive for our crops is far below our cost of production, and despite above-average yields in my area, the MFP payments only allowed us to break even at best. I know some are critical of MFP, due in part to the difference in payment rates among crops, but I can tell you the average 2019 MFP payments on cotton, as helpful as they were, offset only about 39% of the market value that we lost. I know the MFP program was designed to be temporary, but I also appreciate the acknowledgement by the President and the members of Congress that this program is vital because producers were deliberately targeted by foreign countries to gain leverage in a trade war. The President's pledge to producers to continue to provide aid until the trade deal's work is promised is viewed as a lifeline to thousands of farmers and ranchers. I remember the 1980s farm crisis as a young man. I knew farmers who didn't survive. I also remember how bad things got in the 90s and early 2000s, but recall the situation was made bearable by this committee here in Washington. While I'm optimistic about current agreements, as you said, Mr. Chairman, I'm also skeptical, and I do not see a clear and certain turnaround in the farm economy. The simple fact is macroeconomics are telling us to quit. This committee has always stood by farmers and ranchers in rural America through these periods, and we thank you for that, and we hope that you will continue to stand by us.
And we will, and we appreciate your optimism. That is, I think, the nature of the American farmer, having been a part of it, as I said earlier, for 3 generations. We now are at the conclusion of the testimony of the 5 witnesses, and we will now recognize the members in the order of their seniority and those who were at the start of the hearing, and will be recognized in that order. And I'll begin with yours truly as the chair of the subcommittee. And let me ask Mr. Keevy, you have participated in the USDA Food Distribution and Promotion Program that was stood up as part of the trade assistance effort. In your view, what are your thoughts on the program? What do you think went well, and what didn't work? Where should we look for improvement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would be the trade mitigation program. That program, I think, was very, very helpful. Again, it helped us take some of the pressure off from the plums that we did not be able to go to China in the last 2 years. The positive part about the program is that it raised the level of the water for everybody, okay? So it took a lot of plums, almost 400 loads which is about 1,300 boxes per load, off the market so that the domestic market was wasn't suppressed. So that helped not just Kingsburg Orchard, but it helped all our neighbors and the state of California. Yes, I think there's some points that we need to correct on it, possibly concentrate maybe on the members that were actually like grower, packer, shippers of the actual fruit, not so many the brokers on outside. There were brokers that weren't even in the state of California that participated in the program. If that, that minute change would be something.
Yeah, and part of my criticism also is the breadth and the width. I mean, we were in excess of $30 billion, but, when you look at the totality of agriculture in every region of this country, it is a lifeline, but let's recognize that it's a lifeline is more than we need. We need more than a lifeline, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I say if we can get the certainty of opening up markets, obviously China, but Japan, Korea.
I think Secretary Perdue said it well. We want trade, not aid.
Yeah.
Mr. Ewalt and Mr. Huey, you talked about the glimmer of hope in the China deal. You noted my skepticism. And I still hope the long-term growth will be there. Obviously, we're going to have to deal with this coronavirus. will each of you share your perspectives on dealing with China? I've had a lot of folks that have had experience over the years. And obviously, even when we win on the World Trade Organization, China oftentimes fails to comply with the rulings. And clearly, Ambassador Lighthouser and I have had that conversation a number of times, and the ability to enforce agreements is, I think, where the real challenge is.
So I had the opportunity to tour China this last summer with the Soybean Association, and I guess the way I see it is on phase one. I question their ability to buy that many products in that short a time. The way it's all.
I agree with you.
My biggest concern with China personally is the swine fever that's over there.
I think we all have a concern about that.
And the demand on soybeans. I mean, why would they buy something they don't need at that point? And from a soybean grower's perspective, I mean, they don't need it if they lose half their herd.
And it's important for us to be clear-eyed and realistic as to what the potential here are on these markets, I think.
The potential, sir?
I said it's important for us to be clear-eyed on what the real potential is on these markets. That's, I think, what you're saying.
I think in 3 years, the potential is great for soybeans because I think they rebuild their population. They need it.
Yeah, Mr. Huey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we all recognize for the last decade or so, China has basically been a bad actor in the trade world. And I think the big question we all have, as you state, is will they live up to it this time? I think the reality for many in China, especially in sorghum and cotton, is they need our products. The question is, how do we get them to adequately pay us for those products, and how do we get them to fit that into their system?
Your comment about agreed upon market price and then renegotiating the contracts when the market slips, we've had that in China, we've had that in India, and I think we have to resort to, pay on delivery and get the money up front. Otherwise, it's not there.
Yes, sir, and you and I both know that there are hands that touch those products between mine and the Chinese, and the more that there's slippage, the more those folks are cautious, and the less they're willing to pay down to the producer level for those crops. So I think the real question is, how do we enforce these agreements as we move forward?
I agree. I have some other questions, but my time has expired, and I'll defer now to the ranking member, Mr. Rousing from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You hit on some of the things that I had on my mind, so I'm going to move to a related but slightly different aspect of this. Given the trade difficulties that we've had, Ms. Overman, can you talk about the diversification of your operation, things that you've gotten into, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago that you didn't anticipate you might get into in terms of trying to make things work on the farm, given the very sluggish farm economy of the last 7 years?
Yes, sir. Recently, when we brought our son and son-in-law back on, they've started looking at the bottom line in a different direction than we have because they've got fresh eyes. They're not looking at how long we've been farming, but they're looking at how long they want to farm. So even before they came back, we started to see the need to diversify a little bit. We got out of the tobacco program because it was not paying the bills anymore, and we went into hogs to help shore up our row crops. So our hog system has grown, and under the contract, it's a very stable income as long as your integrator provides your hogs and as long as you don't have a disease. I've seen years where the hogs were the black line, the only black line on our profit loss sheet, and they've carried our farm. I've also seen years when disease hit those hogs, or something happened with our integrator and we didn't get the numbers that we needed, that thankfully the row crops carried. But diversification is you plant or grow several different kinds of crops, and then you pray over them all and hope that at least one will turn out black, maybe two will turn out black. I have lived through triple and quadruple crop failures when everything went south, but you have to diversify. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. And our sons are really bringing that home now that they've come back because they want to continue to farm.
Yeah. It's, I always tell my colleagues that in North Carolina, if you don't have a tobacco contract or a hog contract, you're really not growing anything else either. And, my district is probably the largest sweet potato producing district in the country. And you wouldn't have sweet potatoes if you didn't have tobacco and you didn't have hogs, quite frankly.
We're actually trying a few sweet potatoes this year too, just to hedge our bets and to diversify to see what works.
Yeah.
So much sandy land in our area.
Right. Labor, healthcare, broadband, any of you have any thoughts on that? If Congress could get its act together and address the labor issue, get the wage rate down that you have to pay for the H-2A program, if we got our act together and had a good, sensible healthcare plan that reduced cost, how much would that help farm families?
I think one of the things we all see as we work our way through our budgets every year is the increasing cost of overhead in general. And whether it's the cost of equipment or the cost of labor or the cost of health care, all those costs continue to rise just like they do for each of you in this room. The difference is that our income has declined while those costs continue to rise. And so anything we can do, I think, benefits the whole economy, whether, in the realm of both labor and healthcare issues.
Yeah, I mentioned that because we can have the best trade agreements in the world, but if you're not dealing with a good actor, the Chinese have always been communists. They don't share the same value system that we share, and so I'm thinking about things. What can we do that we have total control over? That would help. The farm sector in a very, very significant way. Let me ask if there are any other folks that want to talk about diversification of their operations as it relates to the trade imbalances, et cetera. Anybody have any other comment?
I can't help but just take a minute from the dairy industry and the importance of the whole immigration reform and the access to laborers. It's a critically important component to have access to full-time workers that are here legally or have access legally here to work. We basically, our farm would have to shut down if we didn't have access to these people. They're just not available. So I just wanted to stress that importance.
The gentleman yield. On that point, are you familiar with the Farm Modernization and Agricultural Workforce Act?
Absolutely.
We passed on a bipartisan measure over to the Senate. Would that be helpful?
That'd be absolutely helpful with the dairy. There's a dairy focus on that as well with this year-round labor force. This would be a big help in the dairy industry, and it's much needed across the country.
Glad to hear that. Thank you. The chair has had a request from the gentleman from California, Mr. Harder, if he could go out of order because he has another pressing commitment he has to attend. So he asked in the favor bank with his two colleagues, Ms. Hayes and Mr. Cox, and the chair, if he could do that. He will owe us big time in the favor bank for that purpose to move ahead. But so as long as you acknowledge that, Mr. Harder, the chair will recognize you for 5 minutes.
I'll add it to the long list of favors that I owe you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And to our two colleagues as well.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much to all the witnesses for being here. Obviously, the success of agriculture is dependent on so many forces that are out of the control of many of the producers. And I think that's been echoed by what I've heard, concerns with labor shortages, price fluctuations, closures, climate variability. But most of all, I think the uncertainty of our trade relationships. And that's not even accounting for the potential impacts of coronavirus on our exports, imports, and purchases. And I think a lot of the farmers in my area really just want a fair shot at our export markets. And that's what our role in this committee really is about. It's about trying to create that level playing field. Because if there is a level playing field, I think our farmers can win. We just need to make sure that that's what we're competing on. And Mr. Kiwi, I'm so happy to have a witness from the San Joaquin Valley here. Thank you so much for making the trip. I know how long it takes. In your testimony, you mentioned the importance of forming and maintaining relationships with importers and retailers is the key to the success of your business. I don't think many people understand how intensive that relationship building can be like. Can you talk a little bit about what it's taken for your company to build those relationships in China, what your staff has to do on a daily basis to make sure that those relationships are maintained for the long run?
Thank you, Congressman. The relationships that I have with Kingsburg Orchard and my partners, they're not customers, they're partners with me. I have U.S. exporters that I sell to, and then they have the relationship with the Chinese partners. But the three of us talk. And in the last 12 years, I have introduced our product to the largest chain store in China 10 years ago. And we have got a relationship with that chain store, the retail market, which is different than what it is with the wet market, which is the wholesale market. There's two very important markets. We are focusing, we as a Kingsburg Orchard think the future is with the retail market as we believe it is in the domestic market. These chain stores are just as big and as powerful as they are here in the United States. The two chain stores that I deal with, actually three chain stores I've opened up, there's some in also Hong Kong, but the ones in China are the two top major chain stores that cover basically almost 70% of the retail business in China. And it's very important with promotions, with discussions, with dialogue, we like to offer them possibly discounts on our product. If they buy so much, I'll give you a discount on the next order. Promoting California stone fruit, plums especially in China, that goes a long way. California and USA, when they see the U.S. flag on our box, on our package, that gives them a safety net to know that they are getting the best product around the world because their plum and their infrastructure is not as good. I've traveled through China for many years, and we have the stronghold, okay? We have the product they want. And it's so important to keep that relationship with the retailers and the wet market, the wholesale market, very important as well. But we're spreading our facets to all those different channels, and it has been very, up to the tariff time, was very successful.
Thank you, Mr. Keevy. One question for you, Mr. Jacquier. Can you please expand a little bit on the type of market access the dairy industry is looking into for a phase 2 deal with Japan? In particular, butter and milk powders, the dairy products that are primarily produced in California. What are you looking for in the phase 2 there?
The Japan, to expand the milk powders, and probably the single biggest component in Japan is the geographical indicators is a big barrier that needs to be resolved. And that is the single biggest piece in there.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, the gentleman yields back with 25 seconds left. Very good. The chair will now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, my friend and the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Not sure when I've participated in a hearing, but it's had 5 more genuine and compelling witnesses. Thank you very much for your stories this morning. I just wish our full committee colleagues could have had the benefit of just hearing you tell your stories. Thank you for that. Matt, thanks for being here, buddy. In your written testimony, you mentioned that obviously, phase 1 agreement, we don't have the specific details on crops by design. That it would not be fair to the markets to do that. But in your written testimony, you and the industry have decided that you think the Chinese should buy 6.5 million bales as a part of that phase 1. Can you walk us through kind of the mechanics of how you came to that number and what the impact would be?
Sure. So first, I want to say thank you to the administration. As I understand it, the way we were included in that specifically for cotton. We don't know any of the numbers, but we appreciate having that system put together. Today, our trade numbers show about 2.2 million bales, but prior to the trade tariffs, we were exporting 5 to 7 million bales of China a year, and we were roughly 40% of the total imports into China. We think
that cotton imports?
For cotton imports, I'm sorry. We think that those numbers ought to be that or better. So we take 6.5 as a baseline number. We expect phase 1 to be better than what we were doing prior to the tariffs. So we take 6.5 million bales as a baseline number, and we hope that it will be better than that. Part of the problem today is we're at 2.2, and the market's dropped this year, which means that we're at risk of cancellations again, as I alluded to earlier in the, so I think the challenge here is how do we get back to those numbers? We know they want the cotton, we just have to get the system in place.
So some of you have talked about, I think, Ms. Overton, you mentioned the importance of the MFP payments, or several of you did. Can you speak to further about a third round of MFP, if, and it can maybe time frame on if we don't get the turnaround USMCA and we don't get the phase one deal done, what kind of impact did the MFP payment, a third round, have? It's a bit of a leading question, but.
Well, I'll take it. I think that short answer is if we don't see an MFP 3 or a real market turnaround, and I don't mean just 10 or 15 cents, I mean real markets in cotton and sorghum and soybeans, which of course will lift everything else, I think those MFP payments will be absolutely necessary, or you will see a large wave of bankruptcies across the country. And I don't think it matters what region you're in. I think we're going to see bankruptcies. We're going to see some already. Let me be clear. This is not going to, the bloodletting is not done, even with a third round of MFP payments equal to the previous payments. Those did not allow us to break even. We've got large MFP payments in my part of the world, and they made up for half of what we lost in this trade agreement. So I think without that, this is easy. I mean, frankly, if I told somebody earlier, if I had a good exit strategy right now, I'd be taking it.
Mr. Ewald.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you're looking at how much debt we're carrying over from the last 2 years and not being able to service that debt on top. I mean, anything that would come would be, in my circumstance, I mean, my lender would really, really be happy because, I mean, it's just going to go back and pay debt. I talked to a good friend of mine that he bought a farm in '92 and he owes more on it now than he did then because he's had to restructure everything. And so the amount of debt that we're piling up, you cannot overcome just by growing corn and beans, unfortunately. I mean, it's just, you can't make that much money on the crop, even if times are good, to pay off that debt right now. It's just, it's unsurpassable. I mean, it's just
sustainable. Mr. Ewald, quickly, you mentioned India, Indonesia, Malaysia, in terms of new markets. What would we sell there, that you think?
I'm speaking strictly from the Soybean Association that India, with their population growth, they're gonna stop exporting soybeans. So we need to capture those countries that have been previously buying from India and jump on. That's why we sent a delegation to Pakistan, Bangladesh. I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and maybe even India if their population growth and they can't produce the amount of soy for protein. I think that's a great opportunity. And everybody talked about when China put the tariffs on that how it devastated the soybean industry, and they blamed us for having all our eggs in one basket. Well, you're not going to turn down somebody that wants to buy your product, So from that standpoint, what I suggest is we need more baskets. But and now we're forced into it because of our issues with China. So, but that's what I see. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from California, my neighbor, Mr. T.J. Cox.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Ewald, thank you so much for your testimony. And, when you were describing that 3 a.m., when you realized that the kind of world had changed, and, if you were sleeping, I would have said that probably what you heard when China announced the retaliatory tariffs was probably the high fives going on in Brazil and around the world, because those markets were opening up to those competitors, replacing the U.S.'s competitors. And the question I've got kind of goes back to that, is that, I hear consistently from farmers and ranchers in my district, about the loss of these markets have had, and they're particularly concerned, and what I'm concerned about is that the other relationships that have been forged in the last couple of years of this trade war, are those relationships going to persist, even after our tariffs are removed? And, traveling around the world, like you said, I'm just wondering the sense that you get about the strength of those other relationships.
Yes. So what happened, I agree that there are relationships that are stronger now because we haven't been in the market. We know that Argentina is getting a lot of Chinese money invested down there for their export facilities, for their infrastructure. We know that that gave them 2 years to improve that infrastructure down there, make them more efficient. You know, one of our, as a farmer in the Midwest, one of our great things that we have going for us is our waterway system and the way that we can move our goods out to other countries. We have a lower cost of shipping from the from our region to China than Argentina does. But giving them that 2 year, you know, kind of a head start, not really a head start, but they had 2 years on us when we couldn't really export to them. They improved their infrastructure, and yes, it's an issue, it's a concern to us. The longer that this went on, we were very concerned that they were gonna have better infrastructure and they were gonna have better relationships with China than us. And so yes, it's very real.
And no, and certainly the question is about, you know, how easily have you been able to find markets to, you know, replace these losses? Mr. Keevy, you were saying that with some of the stone fruit that's been shipped to China, is that because of the tariffs that you're finding other markets, and how easy it has been to find those markets?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Yes, this situation, which I hope is short-term, has made us be much more diligent to find other customers, other countries. And, you know, I have probably opened up to probably 6 new countries that we're going to be trying this year. That, when I say try, is as put more volume into them. We have a product, we have a quality product, they know what it is, and we are going to explore and export into those new countries. But it does not make up what China has taken. But so we will do everything we can to expand our up to 28 countries is where I'm selling into now. But we are looking to every, and again, we need certainty in every export market. We need Japan open with the plums. We have nectarines in there now and kiwi. That's great. But we need plums. They are going to be a huge consumer of plums if Japan opens. Korea, if South Korea opens, that's a big country customer. So we're looking and finding as many as we can. But there's a lot of phytosanitary and barriers that are in our way.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on that. I mean, when we talk more broadly about trade, certainly there's a tariffs, but there's some certainly technical barriers. And if you wouldn't mind touching on those, and really how us as members of Congress can help you continue to grow and expand these export markets, so we can ensure places like the Central Valley continue to remain one of the highest agricultural producing areas in the nation.
Yes. What we're doing right now for the technical part of it is we're trying to get as much as mechanical as we can because, you know, between the water and the labor, some of the highest cost that we have in producing our stone fruit, and we are pushing more and more to get more technology into our system from the field and to the packing house, and hopefully that will you know, reduce the cost for producing our product.
Well, thanks so much for that. And just with my 15 seconds left, I would urge every member that's testifying here today, if you do have time, try to make it over to your senator's office to see if they can pick up that Farm Worker Modernization Act that was passed by the Congress earlier this year. I think that is critical for our industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield.
We thank the gentleman from California, and Chair will now recognize the gentleman from the great state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Ranking Member, for this hearing, and thanks to each of you you and your families for what you do for our nation and for the agriculture industry. It's great having you here. I know you're here at you know, personal sacrifice of your time, but it's so important that you do that. Mr. Huey, what do you think is the most important thing the administration or Congress can do to grow markets for U.S. agricultural products, especially the ones that you grow?
I think trade agreements are a huge component of what we do. We in the United States, and maybe we fancy ourselves that, but I genuinely believe we are the best producers in the world. We have the most fertile land, the best climate, and we do it better more economically and less expensively and with better conservation practices than anybody else. And our world is growing, so the question is, where do we move those products and how do we get an adequate price for them? So I think we need trade. We need for the administration to continue to do what it's doing. We've just got to figure out how to enforce that system.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that. Mrs. Overman, you mentioned disasters and flooding you face, and that sadly these sorts of disasters and many more have affected farmers all over the country in recent years. How have the disasters here in the United States compounded the difficulties of our current trade situation?
The one good example of that is in 2018 with the first MFP payments, we lost a third of our soybeans to flooding. And they were not damaged, they were just completely rotted. And that MFP payment was based on yield. So we lost twice there. So that was very unfortunate for us. The 2019 deal was better based on acreage planted. So thankfully we didn't have a hurricane at that point, but it really helped that it was a more fair way of measuring the losses that we'd had. Natural disasters just leave their scars, and you start marking time by that natural disaster. You know, even your family, you say, well, before Hurricane Fran hit in 1996 or after Hurricane Florence, it changes your perspective when you get 30 inches of rain in one storm. It makes you realize how fragile our system is.
That's a great point. Farm history really gets, those reference points are to that, and there's no industry that's more sensitive to weather than agriculture. And so that's why we try to work hard with not just only stepping up at disaster time, but certainly with crop insurance, making sure our crop insurance program works and works well for our farms. Mr. Jacquer, you mentioned that when we talk about dairy and trade, geographical indications are a top concern. Can you reiterate why this is the case, and not just with our trading partners, but also with third world countries that we may not yet have deals with?
The geographical indicators are really important because, as I mentioned in the testimony, the EU is really trying to own those. They're trying to own them, put a name to the cheese, to the region, and own it. At the same token, there's also an EU-Mexico relationship that's going on, and they're actually using it as a leveraging tool for market access and those types of things, so they're not owning the intellectual property of that. So we need to do the same. We need to be able to use just one portion of that name because it's a common food name that's used across the world, and be able to use it in the same way that they do.
Yeah, I really see, especially the European Union, right? Seems like they're using those as an excuse, I guess, to prevent exports. And I know that's a difficult and challenging thing, but important. But whatever trade agreement we do with the European Union, we need to overcome that. And agriculture needs to be a vibrant part of whatever trade agreement we reach.
And I believe that is as important as just a tariff alone. Those GIs are just, it stops the conversation. It's that important to it as well.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I've only got a few seconds left, so I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and the chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Connecticut for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Connecticut has a long history of dairy farming. However, a combination of factors like low milk prices, lasting damage from trade wars, and the high cost of production have put a strain on the industry. Statewide, there are now less than 100 dairy farms, about 60 fewer than a decade ago. Yet, the dairy industry has remained an economic force in Connecticut. It is estimated that it contributes more than $1 billion annually to the Connecticut economy. The resilience of the industry in Connecticut, even with these obstacles, only serves to prove that given the right opportunities and absent barriers, the dairy industry could be an even stronger force in our communities. Mr. Jacquer, can Can you tell me from your experiences how the lasting effect of trade wars are impacting dairy producers in Connecticut? And what is the long-term economic viability and how does it impact their long-term economic viability and day-to-day operations?
Absolutely. Our Connecticut producers and producers across the country, here's how I look at it. We have the ability, we have the tools, we have everything we need to produce, but you got to be able to have your market, right? It's a supply and demand equation. This is what we're talking about. The trade is an important part of our market, but it needs to be a consistent market, one that we can rely on all of the time. And it's always said within the dairy industry, if the supply and demand moves by 2 to 3%, the dairy farm is impacted by more than 30%. Those are huge numbers. The dairy industry across the United States is over a $620 billion industry, and we need to focus on market access across the globe.
Thank you. I definitely heard from dairy farmers across the district who were deeply concerned before we had the trade agreement in place about what the future would be or what would happen. My next question also to you, in your view, did the market facilitation program make up for the decline in milk prices you saw in relation to the trade disruptions?
So I have a little different view on the market facilitation.
Love to hear it.
I'm going to be kind. We would certainly rather have trade being our market, being our go-to. We're not looking for the handouts, okay? The dairy industry, to put it in perspective against other commodities, the dairy industry lost about $2 billion during that time frame. The dairy farmers received about $300 million. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't feel so good about it. But you know what? Some of that money paid some bills. But it's an unbelievable experience that you go through where you think everything is shored up and you've been made whole when you truly, it's a long shot from what really needs to happen.
So given that this is a USDA program, do you have any advice for us or for the administration on how you wish it would have been set up or how we could make it better?
Well, it's just kind of interesting how maybe the calculations for dairy, ended up there. And again, I'm not looking for the handouts. Let's put our efforts with USTR, our trade representatives, and USDA, and let's get to work and let's make these free trade agreements across the world work, because that will enhance every farm that you have in your backyard in Connecticut and all the dairy farmers across this country.
Thank you. I appreciate that. As you can imagine, sometimes on this committee, I hear my colleagues talk, and they have farms that are the size of my entire state. And so it's a very different conversation, but I am definitely elevating the voices of farms like yours and the farmers in my backyard from my district and across the state of Connecticut. And I can tell you that the committee will be watching the implementation of the USMCA closely, and we'll take any action that is necessary to fight any cuts to the benefits for the dairy industry or the things that we try to negotiate so carefully and work hard towards. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Ms. Hayes, thank you for your comments and your witness's testimony. I believe you really underlined the point that I was trying to make in terms of the market facilitation program. While it provided a lifeline, certainly your numbers on the dairy industry in this country, I think, reflects the reality of the fact of the tremendous losses in equity and outright losses in dairies that have been witnessed in recent years. As, again, the son of a three-generation dairy people, I know those cows got to be milked 365 days a year, at least twice, if not sometimes 3 times. So just a question, do you think the USMCA, with the efforts that I wished had gone further, but with Canada, is going to have some, afford some ability for the dairy industry?
It's going to take some time, but I think it's around enforcing and looking after and following up with them. And the longer this drags on in time, there's more opportunity for for Canada to dilute the waters, so to speak, on what actually could come forward. So we need to have a full-force effort from here, from Congress, and should play an important role in making sure that that happens. Negotiating provisions to step up the work, and more importantly, not wait until Canada and Mexico water down what is really planned out to be. There's a lot of details that are really important for the follow-through.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize our next committee member, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for being here today. It's always great to have farmers representing agriculture as witnesses to the Agriculture Committee. I appreciate everything that's been said thus far. And, you know, a lot of the president's critics will cite the fact that the trade war has had a negative impact on agriculture, and that's obviously true. But what is often left out of the conversation is that for years, we in agriculture, and I say we, I'm a farmer as well and been involved in agriculture my entire life, we have complained about non-tariff trade barriers to certain countries. I'm a cattle farmer. You know, the European Union has been a very unfair trading partner to American beef. My question to anyone on the panel that wants to try to answer this, what other non-tariff trade barriers do you face in your industry? You had mentioned, one of the witnesses had mentioned the currency manipulation by China, and that's a huge problem. And we've complained about that in agriculture for years. I commend the president and Sonny Perdue for trying to stand up to China. Now, we're not anywhere near being able to say mission accomplished with China, but at least China's getting the message that we're serious about it, that this administration's serious about the currency manipulation and the disadvantage that it puts American exporters, particularly agriculture exporters, in with respect to trying to trade with China. We want a level playing field with China. We want a level playing field with the European Union and with every other country that we trade with. But could some of you maybe mention other non-tariff trade barriers that you all face in exporting? Yes.
The one that sticks out really quick with me would be the grains with the GMO products, and the European nation does not want any GMOs to come into their country. And we've got 20-plus years of research that backs up the safety and the usefulness of a genetically modified crop. And it's hard to overcome that education gap that we're seeing when it comes to GMOs.
I agree. I think the European Union uses the GMOs and, certain feed additives or hormones, whatever, in beef, just as an excuse to not have to trade with the United States. Are there any other examples? Yes.
Some others that play a role in this is recognizing the safety of America's dairy products and production systems, including removal of existing unscientific regulations that are blocking U.S. exports. You can establish enforceable commitments for sanitary and phytosanitary standards and technical barriers to trade that provide enhanced certainty for U.S., EU ag trade. Simplify border administration measures as well. These are all non-tariff trade barriers that pose risk.
I agree completely. One other question I wanted to ask. The Trump administration, our trade representatives are working on new bilateral trade agreements with countries like the United Kingdom, and I think that would put a lot of pressure on the European Union if we could get a bilateral trade deal with the United Kingdom. Also working on trade deals with emerging countries like Kenya, and of course India is already an emerged country, but we're working on bilateral trade agreements. Are there any other countries out there that you feel like the United States has an opportunity with respect to the particular agriculture commodity that you all deal with?
Yes, sir. I believe, as I mentioned before, I think that Japan is very essential for our stone fruit industry. They are with the visitations that I've had already with my potential Japanese customers that are already buying other products that are allowed in there, they are doing what they can on their end to promote to their government, push their government to say, we want California plums. They do not grow what we grow in California. They do grow a peach, and I'm not asking to take a peach in there yet. I cannot compete against a Japanese peach, but I sure can beat them on the plum, and that would be one to release the barrier on that, which is fumigation. Same thing with Australia and New Zealand. If we can reduce the fumigation and go with what we have in Mexico, which is a pre-op testing at our facility, I think our business with Australia, New Zealand, and Japan would open up tremendously.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all again for your testimony. Look forward to working with you in the future, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired. I yield back.
All right, the gentleman yields back, and the chair will now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, ma'am, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate all that you do, not just all that you've done to be here, but all that you continue to do in our farming community. So thank you very much. I hail from the Central Coast of California, otherwise known as the salad bowl of the world, which many of you heard, and I know my fellow members on the I Committee have heard me say over and over and over, but I'll never get tired of saying it, just to let you know. We have a lot of specialty crops. That's all we got, pretty much. And so we ship mainly to Mexico, Canada, but also UK, Europe, China, and Japan sometimes as well. And I admit, when it comes to the trade negotiations, the administration has made progress when it comes to reducing barriers and opening up markets in China and Japan. But I also expect them to continue to do more work on this topic, especially when it comes to lowering tariffs and addressing non-tariff barriers, also in other countries, the EU and the UK. But unfortunately, when it comes to some of the difficult issues and the difficult negotiations, it feels like they've been punted to later dates, especially with SPS issues when it comes to Japan. And then looking at our blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries, they've gained better market access to that country, but those SPS issues, the sanitary, phytosanitary issues, really have not been addressed. And even tariffs on strawberries remain high, unfortunately. Now, I get that mandatory crop purchases and the China Phase 1 agreement, as well as the MFP programs, have helped some farmers, helped them keep afloat. I get that. But as you have said, I think, and as we all know, neither of those by themselves can make up for the open markets and trade certainty that you deserve, if you ask me. And so I understand the plight of commodity crop farmers when it comes to them getting a majority of the MFP. But I just have to say, in my biased opinion, if I may, that specialty crops were left out of that equation quite often. And so I'm glad to see that we have a California specialty crop farmer here representing today. And I hope that all specialty crop farmers are remembered and recognized as we move forward with these trade negotiations. Now, Mr. Kiwi, you note in your testimony that China Phase 1 agreement made SPS improvements for stone fruit. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, I recently met with the USTR agriculture negotiator, Greg Dowd, Ambassador Dowd. Last week he was in my office. And he said that the SPS negotiations are coming along, especially when it comes to ensuring that market access for covered crops were progressing and that they were on schedule. Are they on schedule for you?
For China?
Yes.
Yes. They are. They just approved March 2nd that nectarines are now allowed into China. Again, that will be with the 70% tariff, though. It's not going to be with the lower tariff. So that sounds great that we can do nectarines into China, but if I have the 70% tariff, it's just words. I will send those to Taiwan, I will send those to Hong Kong, or you keep them in the United States. It's a step. It's a positive step. China has agreed to that. That's great. We just need to get the tariff reduced back to what it was prior to 25% or even zero if we could. And then we will open the gates to that because, again, we have a superior product that they cannot produce in China, and they know that.
Understood. And moving on to Japan with the Phase 1 agreement, Obviously, it lowered tariffs, but it didn't address SPS issues, correct?
No, Japan has, to me, Japan has really dragged their feet, and it's really not based on our side. We have put everything into their USDA, to their APHIS. It's taken almost 15 years for them to approve a nectarine. It took them almost 15 years to approve a nectarine variety, and we had to give them so much scientific information, and we have done that with the plums. We have given them so much information on plums. It is now, before I left California, it is still in their hands. We're waiting for them to say, okay, this fruit will not hurt. I understand they're protecting their local growers, their farmers. I respect that. But what we have with our phytosanitary barrier policies, it won't affect them at all, and it will help their economy as well it will with ours.
Well, I will continue to pass that message along to Ambassador Dowd and others, and I hope that all of you do the same. Thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from California. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Hagedorn.
Thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member Rouser, appreciate that. Nice of the witnesses to be here. I appreciate what you do for the American people and people around the world. I mean, right now, the big topic of discussion around the globe, and rightly so, is the coronavirus and how fragile people are when you look at it and what can happen to folks. And but that can also happen with our food supply. That can happen with when people take for granted what happens there. They walk in the grocery store and there's all the food, an array of choices, high quality, affordable prices. Isn't that wonderful? It is, but we have to keep doing what we can to sustain that and protect that, and I appreciate what you do to deliver that every day. I was one of the early champions of the USMCA trade deal, and I thought it would build momentum to help us with the deal with China, which I think it did, and also Japan was a good thing, and we're looking at Vietnam, and on we go down the list. We've mentioned some of them today, other countries that you'd like to see trade negotiations turn into export opportunities, but I'd say to my friend from the dairy industry and ma'am from you with the hogs, are there any particular markets that you're looking to get into that maybe we're not focusing on at this time?
I'll start. I agree that if we open up Great Britain, that'll open up the European nation a little bit better for us. I recently heard a statistic that 95% of the people in the world live outside of the United States. So I would say anybody in the world is fair game for pork. It's the most widely eaten meat that we have. And I would like to also reiterate that the fact that the Chinese people have purchased Smithfield Foods, that shows great confidence in our USDA testing and safety protocol that we have set up, and that they want our products if we can just work out how to deal with them trade-wise.
Thank you.
I would answer in the way Southeast Asia, anywhere in that area, is definitely an area of focus for the dairy industry. And I just want to use the example that the dairy industry has already embedded itself into Singapore and in that region with dairy farmer investment in culinary institutes and teaching culinary chefs and those types of things about what American agriculture, American dairy products can bring to the table to them. So the investments are there. I think we've got boots on the ground, and that's just going to explode in the near future. And but just an area of something that we want to certainly be proactively in completing trade
Some of it's
negotiations.
just good marketing, it sounds like, and that is an important part of it. So, Mr. Jacquer, is that how you pronounce it? Okay. You talked a little bit about these geographic indicators, the European Union and others trying to keep some of our products out based upon names that they want to take advantage of us on. And I mean, in our district in southern Minnesota, we have Kraft Heinz, and there's like 5,000 jobs across the entire district, especially in dairy, that could be impacted. Do you feel that we're doing enough, that the trade rep and others are on the right track? Is there anything in particular you think we should do up here? Should we just be a little bit more forceful and let our friends in the administration know how important this is?
I hope that everybody leaves here with knowing the importance of the geographical indicators to the trade. It is just as equal with any tariff that's on there. Congress needs to keep the push on USTR and the USDA to keep driving this home. We have to be successful in this, or the dairy industry is lost.
Thank you. And Mrs. Overton, North Carolina, like Minnesota, a lot of hogs. I think Congressman Rouser and I are second and third in the country for that, and that there are these standards in some of these deals could be growth promoting hormones, things of that nature, where they use in order to have a barrier. What do you think should be done in these trade deals in order to make sure that we can bust down those barriers, or I think USMCA was a pretty good example of how that can be improved. That's pretty important to you, I take it?
It is, actually. I think one of the things that hurts us the most is how our food is labeled when it gets packaged. And labels are so misleading when those labels go out. People believe what the label says as the truth, when hormone-free meat that's just no such thing. Because no added hormones would be proper. But we were selling directly to Japan. Our pork was going directly to Japan 2 years ago, and it was called silky pork. And it was now, our integrator changed our genetics. So now we're just going straight into the Smithfield line and becoming just generic Smithfield pork. But absolutely, when it comes to trade in other countries, I think labeling and marketing is critical.
You want an even playing field, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. We thank the witness for her answer, and the chair will now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Axney.
Thank you, Chairman Costa and Ranking Member Rouser, and thank you for letting me wave on to the subcommittee today to be able to be here. Very grateful.
We appreciate your participation. It's an important voice.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad that one of our great Iowans is here. Rob, thank you so much for your personal testimony this morning. I know that it's difficult to talk about the issues that your family is facing, so I thank you for being here very much so. Obviously, you heard that the trade war is impacting families in Iowa dramatically, and as I've traveled my district and met with Iowans, I've heard countless stories of stress and frustration from, of course, corn and soybean farmers trying to figure out just how they're going to make ends meet during this ongoing trade war. And while there are sometimes incredibly painful stories to hear, those stories need to be told. So I'm glad that Rob is here today to share those with the committee. I'll never forget one of the first stories I was informed of was a farmer who called my office and really was contemplating if it was to his family's benefit for him to even be here anymore. And that's the kind of suffering that's going on in row crop states like Iowa right now. The trade war is absolutely impacting so many families across our state. So, Mr. Ewalt, I want to start by quickly going back to your opening testimony where you said you were concerned about whether you'll be able to receive an operating loan this year. And I know you took on a second job as a truck driver for a few nights a week to pay down debt. I love your Iowa fortitude. This is exactly who we are. I think you said you're up all night worrying about this anyhow, so you might as well be making some money. As much as I appreciate that, it's not what we want to have you doing. We want to have you farming as much as possible. So I'm just wondering, this second job, and you're out there in the community with your friends and neighbors, are you seeing this becoming more common? And are you seeing your friends and neighbors in similar situations?
Yes, it's not something people like to talk about out in the open, but I have some good friends that are going through the exact same thing, and they've taken up other jobs. You know, they've gone to town and everything to anything to help out. You know, it's as I said earlier when I kind of went off track in my oral comments about, you know, I have a friend that owes more on a farm now than he did in '92 when he bought it, and it's just through refinancing. And I mean, the only way, you know, it's just tough to overcome that debt. And the truck driving, yeah, it helps. I mean, it's a very good income, and maybe I'm a better truck driver than I am a farmer because I make money at that. You know, I don't know. But there are a lot of people that are doing that. I have a friend that I saw at the airport when I flew out yesterday morning that he's marshaling planes. He farms, and now he had to find something else to do. His passion's airplanes. So he went and got a job at our local airport marshaling planes to provide for his family and offset debt. So it's happening all over. What I'm really concerned about is that, we have an average age of farmers in the United States of 59, 58 years old. I'm not sure what it is, but people my age in their 40s that have never had an opportunity to purchase land at an affordable price, at a cash flow, build up equity. I've never had that opportunity, and a lot of people my age haven't had that opportunity. So they're sitting with equity only in equipment that depreciates and wears out, and it doesn't have that value. When that happens, you have nothing to borrow against. I'm afraid when this is all said and done that you're going to see a jump in that average age of farmer. Because the ones that are in their 60s and up, they have $4 or $5 million worth of land equity behind them that they can weather this storm and stay in business. I don't. And a lot of my friends at our age don't. And I think that if you lose enough 40-somethings, that's really going to jump that average age. And what's that look like 10 years down the road then? I don't know.
Yeah, Rob, I so appreciate that, and I want to ask you another question, because you noted how the impacts of the trade war isn't just being felt by farmers, but by, of course, equipment manufacturers as well. What's been the impact of the community at large in Davenport, especially with regard to John Deere?
Well, John Deere, corporate headquarters is right across the river in Moline, and I haven't paid attention to how many, but I know that there has been several rounds of layoffs. And in fact, I was just at another meeting with somebody that was looking at layoff with John Deere, and she was able to go to the corporate side because we have Harvester Group and we have Planter Group, Cedar Group, and there's been considerable layoffs there, and also tractors up in the tractor plant up in Waterloo also has looked at some layoffs. So it's affecting everybody, and I talked to owners of equipment dealerships, and it's tough for those guys. I mean, they just can't. Their service department's doing great because nobody can afford to buy new equipment, so they have to repair their old. So their service department's doing great, but as far as moving new equipment, it's not happening.
The gentlewoman's time has expired, and the chair appreciates, Mr. Ewalt, your passion and your testimony here today. Mr. Bacon, the gentleman from Nebraska, will be the last committee member to ask questions, and then the ranking member and I will wind up this hearing. Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for letting me do this on the backside. We were just in a hearing on the agreement with the Taliban, trying to go through the opportunities and the risks there, so I appreciate letting me come on the backside of this. Thank you for being here today, each one of you. My question, I want to ask you about some of the things we're doing with livestock, though one of you have a direct industry line there, but some of y'all are affected indirectly. So I'm a big proponent for the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, research going into things such as trying to deal with the African swine fever. So how important is these programs for you? I know one's directly affected, some maybe less so, such as nectarines, but I just think there's a lot of connections here and secondary impacts. I'd just like to hear your thoughts for those who wish to. Please.
We had a mock drill in September or October of what would happen if African swine fever hit North Carolina, just one North Carolina farm. And the CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council came to the meeting after the drill, and he said, I don't own a hog, and I'm terrified for you guys, honestly, because they're looking at complete and total shutdown of all traffic, which would mean not only could we not sell our product, but we can't feed it either, because we can't even bring a feed truck in if this is discovered in our area. So having a vaccine, first of all, having the borders so locked down and having those beagles in the ports and the airports to stop any meat in, that's the first line of defense. And the second line of defense would be the vaccine bank.
Thank you, Sonny. And you brought up a point that I was trying to get to here. It's not just the people doing the livestock, it affects your grain industries as well. So I would love to have anybody else jump in on that thought.
I'll speak from the dairy industry perspective, the hoof and mouth disease, all of those types of things. These are, as you've brought out, extremely serious issues. It would just basically deploy a crisis overnight. In the dairy industry, food insecurity comes to mind. We've actually done some crisis plans within our co-ops of perimeter, where that would be shut down, and it's just an unbelievable, unfathomable approach of what we may have to do with really not knowing what that result is going to be after that effect. But we definitely need to stay focused on these bigger type diseases that are out there. I appreciate you considering that.
Absolutely. When you talk about you've discovered you've got that disease and you have to depopulate your farm, and it's one thing to depopulate birds, but when you talk about depopulating 300-400 pound hogs or cows, that takes a lot of planning.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do it? A lot of fuel. If you're going to incinerate, burial, it just takes a lot.
Further, it's going to devastate our grain industry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of secondary and tertiary effects here. I'd like to go down to the healthcare question that we just, Ms. Saxony brought up. I think, ACA's helped some folks tremendously, particularly at the lower income levels and pre-existing conditions, which we all embrace. But there were also losers in this, small businesses, real estate agents, and I would also say farmers, by and large, who are paying double and triple the premiums. Now, one of the ways we tried to deal with this was associational pools and other options to lower costs, but now the courts have ruled that associational pools are not allowed under ACA. Would this have helped you, and should we still pursue some of these other opportunities to help lower costs for our agriculture and farmers? Thank you. And I'll just open it up to anybody.
I'm going to jump right on that one because that's been a real burden for us. I've worked for our company, for our business, for 38 years. And 3 years ago, I had to start working without salary. At the age that I am, it's time to start building up for my Social Security and looking forward to retirement. I should be at the peak of my salary. But we were paying $2,800 to $3,000 a month on health insurance premiums. If we took my salary off the table, which was not covering our premiums, then we could finally get into the ACH at a subsidized rate. Shouldn't have to do that. Should not have to sacrifice your salary in order to get health care. We don't fall under any other option being a small business.
Should we pursue these associational health plans?
Absolutely. Anything.
Anyone else? Looks like I'm almost out of time, but maybe have one more chance for someone else to answer.
I absolutely think those association plans are important. I will say from our perspective, we've lived through a child who had a severe disease, and I'm thankful that ACA did not kick us out of pre-existing conditions. My little one behind us is a cancer survivor, and those things would have been devastating. I'll also say that during that time, our family paid about $35,000 a year in medical costs, most of which is insurance, and that is not a sustainable system.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
We thank the gentleman, and we have now concluded the subcommittee hearing. All the members of the subcommittee have had an opportunity to ask their questions and make their comments known. I will yield to the ranking member for his closing statement, and then I will finish with mine.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of the witnesses who are here today. This is like the ranking member Conaway said. I want to echo his comments. This is probably one of the best panels that we've had before the subcommittee, and really appreciate your heartfelt testimony and the way that you have helped to enlighten the subcommittee and other members that were able to come from the full committee. I had the thought during the course of this hearing that not only does agriculture need new markets, but agriculture also needs some new products, which brings me to and this is a topic for a different day, but the importance of agriculture research and the fact that agriculture research funding has been so stagnant for so long. There's no telling what the untold cost of that has been to agriculture. So anyhow, I mentioned that for the record because I think it's important and a topic for another day. But again, thank you for being here. Appreciate everything that you do. You guys are the heart and soul of America, and there are many of us on this committee, all of us on this committee really appreciate everything that you do to sustain and enhance this country. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for his comments, and I share his thoughts as it relates to the compelling testimony that I think we witnessed this morning by this panel of stakeholders. The title of this morning's subcommittee hearing was the U.S. Agricultural Trade, a Stakeholder's Perspective. And I believe the five of you did a very good job of representing the breadth and width of American agriculture and the challenges you face every day. And from my own personal perspective as a third-generation family farm, I know the challenges that you face. I face it every day as well, as has my parents and grandparents. It's a tribute to American producers throughout this land that less than 5% of the population is able to produce such an incredible amount of agricultural product that not only feeds and sustains every American and at their dinner table every night, but is able to succeed and compete given the fact that they have a level playing field. When you have a level playing field, and the challenges you all testified to this morning is that you do not always have a level playing field, but yet when you do, can compete with any producers around the world. The planet clicked 7 billion people 2 years ago. It's estimated by the middle of this century we'll have another 2 billion people on the planet. The whole question of sustainability, I think, is absolutely at the heart of this testimony. Sustainability not only here in our country but around the world with climate change and other factors that come together in ways in which we cannot always predict. And so it is important that all of us as members of this subcommittee and the full committee understand the challenges and how to best advocate on behalf of all of the issues that you articulated here today. Certainly, improving our trade agreements as we have been able to do in a bipartisan fashion with the Canadian and Mexican agreement, we think is important. Our efforts with Japan and China, we hope, will provide better opportunities. Clearly, Europe and the UK are opportunities. As I have discussed numerous times with my colleagues here in the subcommittee and full committee and with Ambassador Lighthouser, the key to most of these agreements end up being enforcement and the ability to deal with that. You touched on other issues that deal with input costs for the American farmer that involve health care, that involve issues involving labor, and other regulatory constraints that you face. Mr. Ewalt, the fact that you're still hanging in there and your passion and your desire is reflected by all of you, I think is a tribute to the American farmer. So we want to thank you. We know that the MFP payments are a lifeline. They should not be a way of life. I think everyone agrees on that point. And we need to continue to be the strongest advocates we can be on your behalf, and that's our responsibility. So I want to thank all of you for your testimony. I think it was a terrific panel that we had here, as the ranking member noted, and other members have agreed on. And we'll continue to work with you, and you continue to do the best you can. Nobody does it any better than the American farmer. Paul McCartney didn't say that, but he meant that. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This subcommittee hearing is now over.